Every once in a while, I get a comment that's like, well, you're not a real man because you can't this and you can't that. And I used to be affected by such comments, but now I no longer am. So in this video, I'm going to show you my two-step method to overcoming those kinds of statements. The first step is actually to do nothing. When someone tells you those things, you don't respond. You could, of course, kind of play with it, like, if you just knew what else I don't know and what you'll have to teach me. But that's kind of risky, and you have to have a lot of context awareness, which oftentimes is more difficult than it seems. So you could, of course, play with those statements, but I generally do nothing, because when people say those things like, well, you're not a real man because you can't do this, you can't do that, they are not interested in the truth, but rather they want to play with you, they want to annoy you, or they just want to test you. And so, if the odds are so stacked against you because their intention isn't the truth but to annoy you, if you then were to tell, well, actually it doesn't matter because I can do this thing and I can, you lose. So just play with it or shut up. Generally speaking, being quiet is a good rule for life, because I want to share the fishing analogy. If you're a fish and you see a bait swimming and you open your mouth and bite that bait, well, then you'll get fished. But if you keep your mouth shut, you won't. So the worst thing you can do as a fish is open your mouth and bite that bait. And I see those kinds of statements as bait because they're testing you. And so in those situations, I prefer to be quiet. Sometimes I'll play with those things, but most of the time I stay quiet because that's just the easier thing to do, and it also gives them time to think about what they've just said and whether it made sense, because chances are, in most cases, they didn't mean to offend you. Sometimes they do, but in all cases, they have time to think about those things. And so, over time, the amount of those comments that I get goes down. And this is kind of good. The second way to overcome those kinds of statements is very autistic, but it works. I have a list with the title, Things I Will Outsource, where I write down all the supposed reasons why I'm not a real man, according to them. And the list includes things like changing oil, doing electricity, changing tires, and so on. And I have called this list Things I Will Outsource because I understand very well that I will never be paid to do those things. As a matter of fact, I would be overpaid and underqualified. Overpaid in the sense that I would steal value from somewhere else. Like in the time it takes me to do those things and to learn those things, I could be doing something where I get paid more. And underqualified simply meaning that it will take me longer to deliver worse results than someone who's a professional. So not only will I lose time and effort, I will also deliver an inferior result. And so it just doesn't make sense. So it makes a lot more sense to outsource it. That's why it's titled this way. But you could, of course, title the list differently. You could title it Things I Want to Learn, Things I Have to Learn, or something like that. But generally speaking, I would advise against doing so because the list of things to learn is fundamentally endless. But your time is not, and it makes much more sense to focus. And you should not learn something to kind of get revenge on the people who told you to learn those things, otherwise you're not a real man, because by doing so, you would actually prove that you are very much affected by their statements, and so they would have won at making you insecure. So this is why actually shutting up and writing it as a list where it's titled Things I'll Outsource is kind of the same thing. It's different expressions of the same idea, which is to not be affected. And by the way, step 2 is optional. If you have ignored those statements well enough to begin with, then of course step number 2 is not going to be necessary. But another way to generally reduce those kinds of statements is to just get better. Because although it is easy for me to argue that those people can never be satisfied, if you lack the most basic skills, learn them. So don't force yourself to be in this kind of mode where you just reject all the things that people say because you don't want to be affected by life. Sometimes you have to be affected by life, and that's okay. And sometimes people will say those things to offend you, and that's okay. Everything at its place. Sometimes you learn, sometimes you dismiss. And how we've discussed, it's 2 steps. You either shut up and then write it down when it still bothers you, or you play with it, and then maybe you write it down or you don't. And this is how I've overcome those statements. If this video helped you, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.